I work with UNDESA Population Division. Welcome to session 6 on SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. The focus here is on the promotion of a sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. We'll start with Professor Crespo Cuaresma. Thank you. Professor Cuaresma is Professor of Economics at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. He's also Director of Economic Analysis at the Wittgenstein Center for Demographic and Global Human Capital. He's also researcher at IIASA. Thank you.
So, is it working? No, I haven't turned it off yet. Okay. So thank you very much, Sergey, for the invitation. Thanks to the organizers for organizing this wonderful event. And I'm really happy to be here to give you a little bit of the view of macroeconomists about the relationship between aging and economic growth, and also the opportunity of using the new aging variables, the new aging indicators that have been developed by Sergey and Warren in order to try to understand the history of economic growth, the recent history of economic growth, and also eventually to project it into the future, which is something that we may be interested in. So we macroeconomists, when thinking about the effects of aging on economic growth, we take a relatively simple approach. We think of the creation of aggregate income in an economy as the result of a production function mechanism. So we think of the existence, or we think of the modeling income dynamics in a country as being the result of inputs to the production process, then being, in a nutshell, labor, capital, and technology, and outputs coming out being GDP per capita, or some indicator of economic development. So when we think about aging, we can think of the effect that it can have in each one of those three inputs of production. Okay? So starting with labor, which is the most straightforward one. So when we think about the effects of aging on labor supply, we tend to have a look at the fact that by levels of education, by age groups, you tend to find different productivity levels, labor productivity levels in terms of employment. So we would think that it's, from a theoretical point of view, that it's the potential substitutability of people at different age groups in the labor force that could create effects of aging societies on economic growth. How these effects look like from a quantitative point of view, it's still very disputed in the literature. So if you have a look at the existing studies, we have a whole lot of evidence that goes down to the firm level, where we use matched employer-employee data sets in order to have a look at how the age structure in a given firm affects the productivity of that particular firm. And the results seem to be extremely context-specific, sector-specific. So there's no unambiguous accepted empirical result of the effects of aging at the firm level. You find a lot of papers that will eventually tell you that younger firms, or firms with younger workers, tend to present higher productivity levels. However, you find in other countries or in other sectors the opposite effect, or no effect whatsoever. On top of that, since we don't tend to think about labor as being a homogeneous group, a homogeneous input of production, the aging process also creates different incentives in terms of accumulating human capital. It's different type of skills that become important. And this has a feedback effect in the accumulation of human capital at the labor input level. On the other hand, moving to the next input of production, when you have a look at the potential effects that aging processes could have on the accumulation of physical capital, if you go to the good old theoretical models, you would expect that aging is going to have a clear negative effect on savings, as economists tend to think that, you know, the retirement age comes together with an increase of consumption, and that all the saving process is taking place prior to retirement. So you would expect savings rate to go down, and therefore investment also to go down. However, we know that precisely due to the increase of life expectancy, there's quite a lot of extra incentive to enlarge the saving process even to old age, what some authors have come to call the second demographic dividend. And in that case, from a theoretical point of view, you do have two effects which are very unclear in terms of in which direction that effect or aging should affect physical capital accumulation. On top of that, you have also the effects that come from physical capital accumulation that comes from the public sector, where you would expect negative effects from aging due to the fact that you have a more limited amount of resources if you have to pay, if you have a well-working pension system that would have to be expanded when aging takes place. For the case of technology, the third factor, basically everything that cannot be explained through dynamics of physical capital and labor in terms of income dynamics. The effects of aging, they are particularly interesting and particularly disputed empirically. If you have a look at the effects of the age/education structure of economies on the one hand on the adoption of new technologies from abroad, and on the other hand on the innovation processes that lead to new technologies, you do find some kind of complementarity between older and younger populations, right? So you tend to find that populations with older individuals with a relatively high level of education, meaning secondary education and beyond, tend to be much better at adopting technologies from abroad and converging to the technology frontier, while younger populations with highly educated individuals tend to also do better in terms of innovation. So you're going to have effects there, which are also going to be more complex to measure than just having a look at how aging measures affect economic growth on an empirical basis. On the other hand, also to the extent that public research and development expenditures are important to create new technologies, obviously aging processes are also going to create new obstacles to the possibility of expanding R&D from the public hand. So as you can see, all those theoretical channels that I just presented briefly, they all tend to point in different directions. So the idea of whether at the macroeconomic level we observe aging processes usually in developed countries affecting economic growth and how they affect it turns out to be, in principle, an empirical issue. So there's a whole lot of literature out there of papers that try to just run regressions, where on the one hand you try to explain differences in income per capita with the usual determinants of economic growth, physical capital accumulation, labor input accumulation, whatever, openness to trade, you name it. And on top of that, they put some aging measure, which is going to basically bring together all the effects that the changes in the age structure of populations are going to have on economic growth. And if you look back in the history of that literature, basically most people include the old age dependency ratio. That by now, we know that probably it's not the best way to look at it. I'm not going to tell you why, but you all know by now that 40 is the new 30, and that 50 is the new 40, and that therefore we may want to start taking aging into account when it comes to quantifying it in a different way than we have been doing it until now, moving away from chronological age measures to prospective aging. So basically, what I'm going to do right now is to tell you what happens if you do the exercise that people have been doing until now, using chronological age measures, trying to explain differences in economic growth and trying to understand how aging could affect economic growth. And you replace the chronological old age dependency ratio for a prospective old age dependency ratio, which would measure the proportion of people with a remaining life expectancy of less than 15 years as compared to the rest of the population. If you have a look at the development of these two variables for Europe, they're telling you completely different stories, which should not come as a surprise after Sergei's presentation yesterday. So basically, while getting older, this is the increase in the old age dependency ratio we measured with chronological age. While getting older, chronologically, actually Europe has been getting younger, which is a super interesting conundrum. And if you open this to have a look at the differences between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, you find that those dynamics are on top of that relatively heterogeneous and interesting. So if you open this guy up here, and you have a look at the old age dependency ratio chronologically, meant with chronological age, and have a look at how they have been moving for Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and you do the same thing for the prospective age measures, you find that even within those relatively homogeneous groups, you have interesting differences in the dynamics. So you have both. Both groups of countries getting older chronologically. Of course, for the case of Eastern Europe, you have them at a lower level, but the dynamics are pretty much the same. And you have Eastern Europe basically not having had much of an increase or a decrease in prospective old age dependency ratio. It's pretty much bouncing around that level. And you have these younger populations from a prospective point of view for the case of Western Europe. So what, also if you have a look at the individual countries, you see how you have here the prospective old age dependency ratio, you have here the old age dependency ratio with chronological age. You can see basically the movement towards prospective old age dependency ratios being lower than the chronological counterparts. So what I did is actually to have a look at whether prospective measures of aging, in particular the old age dependency ratio based on prospective age, are able to explain better the differences in economic growth that we tend to observe, in this case across European economies. So I did the standard type of exercise that you do, which is you run a panel regression where you try to explain economic growth in income per capita, that's that guy there on the left, and you make it depend on the accumulation of labor, that's simplified here to population growth, the accumulation of capital, that's here the growth rate of the capital stock, and then you take basically the rest of the specification to imply changes in productivity that cannot be explained by labor accumulation and by capital accumulation. You make that depend on the initial level of income per capita in order to have a look at conditional convergence dynamics. And on top of that, you include your aging indicator. So what I'm going to be doing here is just basically replacing this aging indicator here, on the one hand, for the old age dependency ratio in a chronological sense, and then for the prospective old age dependency ratio. Okay? And I'm going to make the effect of aging also potentially depend on the initial level of income per capita. To have a look at whether that heterogeneity that we observe could also have effects in terms of the way that aging affects income growth dynamics. Okay, so what I did is basically take a panel data set for the period 1970 to 2010, and I did 3 different settings. The one hand, I cut it into 5-year intervals, then 10-year intervals, and then 20-year intervals, in order to have a look at whether the effects that you observe tend to be more like medium-term effects or very long-term effects. Okay? And the question that I'm asking myself here is, can we also use, does it make a difference in terms of explaining the recent experience of economic growth in Europe? Does it make a difference whether we take those new indicators on board? On top of that, I'm going to do also something else, which is that has a bit of more relevance for policy as well. I'm going to also do a proper out-of-sample prediction exercise. So I'm going to be cutting the sample also in the year 2000. I'm going to try to use the models that we estimate on that sample to predict the growth rate that took place between 2000 and 2010. And by doing that, I will try to also understand which one of these 2 measures has more of a predictive content in terms of future growth dynamics, which of course has particular implications for the use of such measures for policymakers, right? So I'm of course not going to show you the typical kind of regression tables. I'm just going to verbally describe what comes out from here. And what comes out from here is that in the short run, so up to 5 years, the differences are basically non-existent between old age dependency ratios on the chronological side and old age dependency ratios on the prospective side. However, as you start to move to 10-year intervals and 20-year intervals, it turns out that the old age dependency ratio, the good old age dependency ratio, the chronological one, is not able to explain any more differences in income per capita growth across these countries, and the prospective old age dependency ratio still can. Which basically implies that the inclusion of this life expectancy component also has got more of a predictive content that can be used to predict the future. Indeed, when you do the out-of-sample exercise, you get these results. So this is the root mean square prediction error, the typical way of measuring how far away you are from the actual value for that out-of-sample period that I was telling you about. This is trying to forecast 5 years ahead. The blue line is the chronological age, old age dependency ratio, so it's the model based on that variable, and the orange one is the one based on prospective aging. And as you can see, 5 years ahead, basically both of them do the same job. They do it pretty well. They have a relatively small root mean square error in terms of out-of-sample predictions. And basically there's no difference between the two of them. However, when you try to forecast over the business cycle, so to speak, over 10 years, it turns out that the error you make when using chronological age is extremely larger than the one that you would do when using prospective aging measures. Okay? And this, of course, robust to including a whole lot of other variables, to including life expectancy as an extra variable and not within the prospective age measure. And yeah, pretty much that implies that you have a predictive content in these new variables which goes beyond what you would expect to see just by looking at life expectancy on the one hand and pure chronological age measures on the other hand. Okay. So since time is out, let me just conclude by telling you what we did in here. We basically, for the first time, evaluated empirically whether the new measures of aging that were presented yesterday, whether they are really helpful in terms of trying to, or helping us understand income per capita growth differences across countries. And we find that not only they are, but they also tend to have more of a predictive content that you would expect, which implies that pretty much in terms of making policymakers adopt such measures, you would get benefits that go beyond the fact that you would understand the past better, but you would also have the possibilities of predicting and eventually projecting the future better. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Before going to the next presenter, is there any question of clarification? No? Good, thank you. The next presenter is Professor Naohiro Ogawa from the Tokyo University. He's also professor at the Nihon University College of Economics. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. In my presentation, I want to have 4 messages I want to pass on to you. The first message comes from our work with the National Trust Account, and I want to participate in this growth project. You have to estimate your country's most important graph. Here is the most important graph, vertically.
To the microphone, please.
Close to the microphone. Can you hear me? We're close to this. Okay, the vertically we have monetary unit, the horizontal we have age, and the blue one shows the age profile of labor income, and the green one shows the I have more divided. And then we have the green one shows the age profile of the labor income. With the consumption has 2 components: the private consumption as well as the public consumption. These the 2 functions, income and consumption, have been estimated on the basis of macro data gathered in 2009. And then here is the most important graph for Japan. Then somehow we need another graph for the life cycle deficit. These are two deficits here among the elderly as well as children, and they have a surplus among the working age population. Two deficits go down this way, surplus go down this way. The question is, how are we going to finance these two deficit groups? Well, this is the way to do it. The surplus somehow to finance the deficit through the public and as well as private transfers. And if that's not enough, then we use asset-based reallocation, in other words, savings. And then this is the most important graph in 1984. And then every 5 years we estimate 25-year time, we changed quite a bit. So based on these 25-year, the most important graph estimated for the 25 years in Japan, we can calculate the changes in transfer patterns. Various age groups have young and elderly working age for all the segments of the population. This is the profile that we got for the 1984. This is a real picture, and this shows that here the children, they need, at age 15, they have to somehow get 2 million yen. They have deficit. It has to be financed by the green part means that the parents finance that. Blue part is actually financed by the government. Elderly has the same problem. They get the money from their family and also the government. And the dark blue means they use their own assets. The Japanese elder person was fairly rich back in 1984. Now, I want to move very fast, 25 years time, very quickly, in about 10 seconds. So don't think. I'll go. 84, 89, 94, 99, 2004, 2009. Dramatic change. It's expressed in real terms. So the cost of children went up, increased from 2 million to about 3.5 million. Elder's cost increased from 2 million to 4.5 million yen. That's quite a big increase. And then this is actually 1984. A big difference. But the interesting part is this: the elderly started getting the support from the family members from the age 64. But 94, it's incredible. I couldn't believe it until I calculated this, but they didn't get the money from the elderly children until 81. Not only that, they have actually negative transfer, in other words, they give money to the grandchildren as well as children. So in that sense, in Japan, the elderly are playing a role of society safety net. People tend to believe the elderly is something negative, but actually in Japan, the elderly could be the latent asset. And then, what's more surprising is that cutoff age has been changing. Public transfers, over the period of 25 years, the age cutoff age has moved to 6 to 63, only 3 years. But in the case of familiar transfers, it increased from 64 to 81, 17 years shift over the period of 25 years, which is surprising. Japan is a highly age-graded society, but this private sector change is really surprising. And in other words, government is shifting responsibility back to families. So the families still play the role of shock absorber in that sense. The message too, the elderly as a source of untapped work capacity in Japan. Japan is very notorious in terms of the labor market inflexibility, and we have three notorious fundamentals with regard to the employment practices. One is the lifetime employment, the other one is the seniority-based wage system, and the fourth one is sticky age of mandatory retirement. Back in 1960, when Japan was growing very fast, the golden 60s, retirement age was 55. This 55 started way back in 1920, right after World War I. Didn't change for a long time. And in the 1980s, they shifted to the 60 gradually. Even now, it's 60 years old. Although Japan's life expectancy is the highest in the entire world. I can't believe it. Japanese institutional shift is so slow compared to the demographic change. And if you look at the changes in the reasons for retirement or leaving the labor market among the other persons, the health was a major factor here, but now the retirement age is a main stumbling block for these elder persons. But actually, I know that based on the surveys that these elder persons want to work. They're healthy, they want to work, but they have to quit. So I did some exercise. Say, okay, suppose these guys come into the labor market and steady keep on working. then how many people actually do we have altogether? So actually, if they're healthy, so I use a J-star, which is comparable to the American HRS, British ELSA, or Europe's share. And then, well, actually, this is a logistic regression. It takes one if the person stays in the labor market, otherwise zero. And I find this equation to the if the persons are working in the 50s, in the age 50 to 59. And then these are determinants, all health related. I didn't include age, I didn't include the wage. But these are health related variables. And then result is quite interesting. I don't want to go through in great detail, but you can read my paper. But actually the result was that, okay, this is the result, estimated result. Apply that to those who are in the 60s and 70s. If they behave in the same way as in the 50s, then how many people do we have altogether? This is actually labor age-specific labor force concentration rate. This was observed in 2015. These are additional people that we can have. They're healthy. If they might be able to. They could make contributions up to the economy. More than 9 million people would be incrementally coming into the labor market. How many people? In terms of monetary value, how much can they really generate? Well, there's three ways to do it. One is that we apply the national transfer account age-specific labor income profile. The second one is the market wage rate. The third one is apply the minimum wage. I chose case 2, and then actually these people actually make a great contribution. The labor income to be generated by the additional elderly workers corresponds to the 4.8% of Japan's real GDP. Japan's GDP is growing, and maybe if we're lucky, just 1% a year. So it's almost 5% growth. It's tremendous impact. So we're wasting great human resources due to this very sticky retirement age system. And we call it silver demographic dividend, or we call it third demographic dividend right now. The message 3, changing cognitive function among the old age groups and economic potential contributions. And the government in Japan is very seriously worrying about its dementia. Right now, 2015, they announced the Orange Plan. I don't know why they call it. I know the reason why they call it Orange Plan. It's a long story, I put it aside. And then, actually, 2013, the 16% of the elderly person age 65 are demented. 16%. They said it's going to be almost 20% by year 2025, but their calculation is based on a highly biomedical data only, covering a very specific area near the Kyushu. And they do that for 20, 30 years. And based on that, they project it. But actually, a little bit, I think I should really evaluate that from the socioeconomic point of view. So, because the last data shows that the paper says that all the British, the European countries are doing very well in terms of dementia, onset of the dementia, but Japan and China are two worst countries. They're really the onset has been getting earlier. So I calculated mean age is specific immediately recall score in 10 countries. Japan, pink one is Japan. Japan is sort of middle. But I calculated another one in 2013. It's higher than the 2013. This is sort of middle. And I calculated the cognitive. Japan is currently close to the French level, almost comparable. And I calculated the cognition adjusted dependency ratio. In other words, I applied this cognitive score to the total dependency ratio, kind of thinking similar ideas. You can read the paper if you want, that's shown at the bottom. And then the result is that the US is 0.1 highest among all these 11 countries. North European countries not very good. Western countries, Western Europe, 1.18. Yes, 5 minutes ago, yes. Asia, I think Japan is 0.18, which is fairly comparable to the Western European countries, better than Southern European countries. Japan is been sort of people say Japan is most days and it has a very miserable future. But actually, in terms of total dependence ratio or in terms of age dependence ratio, Japan has the highest, worst scenario. Yes, but if you adjust for the cognitive value, cognitive changes, then our current position is not that bad. So I think we seem to have a better future scenario in that sense. If you do work on this particular aspect. And I actually regression results, I mean, I did the regression in terms of the score, cognitive score. I found that we don't have this information in Japan. First time, I just got this only a few weeks ago. The education is a very powerful the predictor. So I think the government estimate could have been adjusted. You know, they use the biometrical data. They didn't even look at the education. If you put an education for future projection, maybe total number of dementia cases will be drastically changed. So I think these are things we have to work on. I mean, for the government planning, and also this is future education change based on census. Right now we have so many other persons having only the primary or the lower level of education, but we will have more and more college graduates, so on and so forth. Plus, those people born after World War II will be better nutrition, and so on and so forth. So I think overall, cognitive function will be better in years to come. Last message is unprecedented value shift. The Minute newspaper has been collecting the same data, the data since 1950, asking the same question to the women of reproductive age below age 50. The question is, green one is, are you going to rely on the children for old age? Yes, back in 1950, when Japan was still poor, 2/3 of mothers said yes, but it kept on falling, particularly after the establishment of the Social Security system. In other words, bottom one, the green one is sort of linearly declining. I can explain, we can expect a future trend, but we ask another question to the same respondent. How about taking your parents? All this time, the report shows that 80% of Japanese women said it's good custom to take care of elderly parents. But all of a sudden, I don't believe it, declined. Why? Because government changed the policy. They said, we can't afford the hospital cost. We decided to send these people back home. So of course, Japanese caregivers, middle-aged women, said, no, thank you. So the value will change dramatically. And then this is actually, since then, the proportion proportion of those who are living with the parents, the elderly person living with the parents, have been falling continuously. But that's not the end of the story. 1 month ago, I really got shocked by this result. It went down further. Now only 25% of people think it's a good idea to take care of the parents. And the demographic shift could be dangerous, could be very, very detrimental, or the devastating, but the value shift could be more devastating. Thank you.
Presentation. The next presenter is Professor Andrew Scott from the fellow at All Souls, Oxford University, and the Center for Economic Policy Research.
Great. Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Okay? I'm very jet lagged, so I'm going to need your energy, so you might have to do a bit better than that, I think. That's it. Thank you all. I appreciate that. Thank you, and echo thanks to the organisers for bringing together a great selection of people and ideas. And thank you too for the invitation to present my work. As I only know 2 people at this conference before I arrived, you can probably tell I'm a bit new to this area. So let me just say a little bit about myself and why I think I'm here. So I'm a macroeconomist. Most of my career has been spent looking at GDP, interest rates, and working with central bankers and ministers of finance. But there's only so long you can talk about what's going to happen to interest rates next month, and I've always been interested in big long-run trends, and nothing is really bigger or more intimate to us as people than demographic change and an ageing society. And every year when I sort of gave a talk about the ageing society, I just felt a real disconnect, something going wrong intellectually, because I couldn't understand how around the world we've taken this key statistic, on average, we're living longer and we're healthier for longer, and time how we turn this into big, bad news of an aging society. There just seemed a fundamental disconnect between those two facts. And the more I thought about what was behind it, the more I realized that there was a problem in certainly economics and how we looked at the topic. And I was talking to my colleague, Linda Grattan at London Business School, who's a psychologist, and I said, I just don't think people and governments have got this right. And she said, well, I don't think companies got it right. So we wrote a non-academic book 3 years ago called The 100-Year Life. In Japan, it's called The Life Shift. And to my great surprise, it's turned out to be an international bestseller. I think we sold about 500,000 copies. And I say that for a couple of reasons. The first is just a press event about how to engage people. And it's a different take on aging. It's about trying to make it accessible to everyone at every age. Also, the book was published 3 years ago, but the momentum is sort of, if anything, building around the book. And I think what's interesting about that is that tells us that something is happening. 30-odd years ago, as an undergraduate, I was writing essays about an aging society, and kind of not much has been done, but now it feels like there's something in the air. So what I'm now doing is focusing my academic research on this topic. I'm going to come along and talk not about the book, but what I'm trying to do macroeconomically. And I'm going to echo many of the themes you've heard already from the previous speakers of this panel and also yesterday. But I'm going to try and do it in a slightly different way. I'm going to try and step back a little bit and give you an overview of where I think things are. And of course the danger with an overview is it can be very simplistic. But basically this is it. There's two things happening. The first is there's an aging society. There's a demographic transition, the birth rate falls, more people live for longer, and the average age of society increases. And that tends to be something that dominates what everyone thinks about in this topic. But on the right-hand side, there's something else, which is how aging is changing. And I'm going to focus on that particular channel. I want to talk about the longevity effect, because what it really means is we're younger for longer. And these are the two forces that are driving demographics going forward. Yesterday, Simon said that demographics is predictable. The bit on the left is relatively easy to predict far ahead, which is true, but the one on the right isn't. And it's the one on the right that's been the focus of nearly all our conversations here during this event. And I think what's interesting about the one on the right is, by and large, it's ignored, certainly in the economic policy making world. I'm reminded of the thing about the frog in the pot of boiling water. By the way, I don't know if anyone's ever put the frog in the boiling water, but I'm going to carry on with the metaphor. The frog doesn't notice that the temperature of the water is changing and it doesn't move. And that's a little bit how I feel about that right-hand channel. Bit by bit, we've been aging better, but governments are still stuck with a very misleading concept of age because they focus just on the left-hand side. But both these channels are in operation. It's not that there's just one or the other, they're both in operation. Some individuals go down the left route more than the right route. Some countries go down the left route more than the right route. And the complexity of this topic is making sure we have policies that cover both. Now, I'm going to try and show you some data. Of course, the relative weight of these different channels, what I call the aging society story, the demographic transition, and increase in the average age of society, the one on the left. And of course, that is a challenge, because if we're not aging differently and there's more old people, then yes, the economy will struggle. Yes, public finances will struggle. And there's a big issue about caring or many of the issues that you worry about so profoundly. And in some countries, that's very, very dominant. In other countries, it's the term on the right that's most important. And we need to think about this balance between different countries. You can probably guess what it's going to be. The faster countries go through the demographic transition, like Japan, the more problems they've got on the left-hand side. The slower the demographic transition, the more opportunities you've got on the right-hand side. However, what I think that means is that every country needs to ensure its policies focus on that right-hand side and making the most of that longevity channel. And the countries with the fastest demographic transition, in a way, have to double down on the right-hand side and do something on that. Now, let me just come back to what I think is underlying everything here. And that is something that I think causes no end of confusion. The word aging is just so confusing. There's so many different meanings and interpretations. But we have another area of confusion. Basically, age is malleable. And the previous speaker was pointing out how Alzheimer's is malleable, our behavior, our education, our diet, our exercise, our environment, all affects how we age. Every single paper I've listened to during these 2 days has been about how aging is malleable. And what that means is the relationship between many of the dimensions of age we care about, and here I've got biological age on the first axis, how fit and healthy and productive I am, its relationship with chronological age is changing. And that is the cause of so much confusion, because if we had just chronological concepts of age, we're missing this biological change that's occurring. We're missing the fact that we're aging better. And of course, if you think about everything we've been talking about at this conference, it's kind of two dimensions. The first is how we've changed over time how we age. Today's societies are aging better than they used to. Of course, within society, there's a great deal of diversity in how people age. Education and income means some people are better off biologically than others, but the same chronological age. It all comes down to this concept that aging is malleable. And by the way, when I say malleable, I'm focusing here on environment and behaviours, but of course science, and particularly recent scientific progress, says that aging may be a lot more malleable than we even thought. But most of the evidence suggests that how we age is a big behavioural issue rather than something fixed. So I think this malleability of age and produces what I call myths of an ageing society. So let me try and run through the myths of an ageing society. Now, as I'm sort of sitting here the last day and a half, what I've been thinking is, I wish I had a bunch of economists in the room, because actually I think you know all of these myths. So kind of, I've got the wrong audience for these next things. But let me try and rehearse why this age being malleable leads to these four different myths. The first is chronological age is a good measure of aging. I think we've already sort of seen that that's not true. Secondly, for all countries that aging is not true. Thirdly, that this is not all about end of life or people being old. It's actually about the whole life course. And fourth and finally, I get very nervous when people talk about young versus old issues, and I'll try and explain that in a few moments. So let me just focus on chronological age to begin with. In economic speak, it's a nominal variable. It's bizarre, most of economics is obsessed about the difference between real and nominal variables, but we just throw that all out the window when we look at aging. But as we've seen already, chronological age does not match with biological age. But if we focus only on chronological measures of age, then we only see an aging society. We see none of the benefits of the fact that we're aging better and how to exploit that. We are blind to the policy channel, the policy mechanisms that can improve that malleability of age and make the most of how malleable age has become. The previous speakers showed that if we change retirement age, then we're going to get a big economic effect. If we look at chronological age, we don't think of those policy levers. We have to think more broadly. And as I mentioned yesterday in the questions, the world's obsession with chronological measures of age is pretty recent. For most of human history, no one knew how old they were. It's governments, when they started keeping birth records, that became obsessed with the issue. This is simply showing data we've seen before. This is looking at mortality rates in the UK, and a 78-year-old today has the mortality rate of a 65-year-old in 1922. We've seen this time and time again, so let's think about indexing what we mean by old to something more like mortality rather than years from birth. Then look at the second myth, which is all countries are aging. You know, the average age of society is increasing around the world, and I think all bar one country, the proportion of people aged over 65 is increasing. But of course it depends on these two different effects. Demographic transition, the aging society, does lead to an increase in age, but the longevity effect means in real terms we're younger. So what's the balance between these two forces? And you can imagine it's going to differ from country to country. So if we look at the left-hand chart, this is showing you the US. I could show loads of different countries. The US, you can see that the average age of society is increasing. But it also shows you the average mortality rate. And of course, with the average age of society increasing, you'd expect the mortality rate to rise. But it hasn't. Despite the shift to more and more older people, the mortality rate has continued to fall. That's the average, that's the longevity effect that I was referring to. And of course, the mortality rate is an indicator of how long you've got left to live. So basically, the average American has never been so old, but never had so long left to live. That's what I mean by it being ambiguous whether we really have an aging society or not. Yeah, I'm older, but I've got more years to come. We need to think about both of those channels. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see that Japan has both an increase in the average age and an increase in its average mortality rate. And that's not because Japan isn't benefiting from falls in mortality rate, it's just the shift from the falling birth rate into older age cohorts is so large that effect is dominating. Japan is seeing the aging society effect dominate the longevity channel. US is seeing the longevity channel dominate the aging society effect. That's why I think Japan has to try and double down on its policies to make the most of that longevity challenge. Just trying to show you some of the decomposition, you can look at the average mortality rate and say, why is it changing? And the area on top says it's rising because of a shift in population towards older age groups, and the bit at the bottom says the mortality rate is falling because the mortality rate is falling for all ages. And you can see that even though Japan has got bigger falls in mortality than America, what is swamping is this shift into older cohorts. Japan has an aging society more than it has a longevity channel. The bit on top is the aging society, the bit on bottom is the longevity channel. So let me come back to a couple more of the myths. The first is that it's all about 5 minutes. One of the challenges from about longer life is I always run out of time when I do this presentation. But next myth is it's all about end of life. It's really about all of life. The 20th century saw the creation of 2 new stages of life, teenagers and retirement. As life's extended, we created new stages of life. Time is a social convention. We structure it in a way that works for us. And as we're living for longer, we have more time. And we are seeing significant changes in how people behave. People are having children later, they're getting married later. In the UK, you're more likely as a woman to have a child in your 40s than you are under 20, which is an extraordinary change. The number of people working over 70 has doubled. And the fastest growing age group for divorce in the UK is the over 80s. People are behaving differently. So we are redesigning the map of life. If I said to you the day has gone from 24 to 32 hours, you would structure your day differently. You'd get up, I'd get up earlier, I'd go to bed later, I'd sleep in the middle of the day, I wouldn't have 3 meals, I'd have 5 small meals. We are restructuring time. And that's important, because if you look at the next point, I get worried when I hear sort of lots of discussions about the youth wave or the older society. Because everyone is a social pioneer learning to live with a lifespan that we didn't previously expect. Everyone's got more time ahead of them, and so they need to behave differently from the past. They need to invest much more in their education and their health because there's more time to come. And that means that young and old alike are trying to redesign how we think about life. Sure, there are lots of societies with a very young population right now, but don't think about them as being young because they're the future old. And how do we get them to age as best as possible? It's a different approach to the life course. Just as we finding a different approach to the life course for those in their 80s, we think differently for those in their 20s. So what does all this mean for economics? Well, in economics there's a famous result, the sort of monetary neutrality theory, which is if you double nominal variables like the money supply, you don't affect real variables like output. So if we change chronological age but not biological age, we want to make sure we don't mess up our economy. And this is the way I think we've got to think quite deeply, because one of the things 100 Year Life book talks about is we created a 3-stage life in the 20th century when life was 70 years long: education, work, retirement. And much as I like the presentations of alternative aging and the alternatives to the old age dependency ratio, I worry that they cause a problem. Because if we do push back retirement to mid-70s or late 70s, we need to do something about education. We can't just make one change, we have to look at all the other things that will stop us getting a longevity dividend. We've got to make people productive and healthy for as long as possible, and that's more than just changing the time in which we retire. We have to think about all the other inputs that keep us fit and healthy for long. Someone who's in their early 40s in the UK, US and Europe is probably going to be working to their early 70s. That means they've got more work to come than they've done already, which is always a very sobering thought when I tell people that. They've got to think about their career and education in very different ways. So what do we need? Well, this conference is about better measures of aging. I think there's been a lot of progress. We also need to understand better the mechanisms behind aging, and then thirdly, we need to focus on what are the policy instruments that support it. And that's more than just health, of course. I've stressed education in this talk. So let me try and conclude. The malleability of aging is the core of all our confusions. It underlies our ageist stereotypes. It also leads to all sorts of problems in thinking about how we reap a longevity dividend. But it also means demography is not destiny. We need to focus on the life course and how we structure time. That is the unifying theme behind all that we are talking about. We certainly need to move away from a chronological sense of age. We now need to understand better how we can affect the path of aging, and we have to disentangle the nominal age effects that are so rife in our economy. It's not just that 70 is the new 60, 70 is 60 with 10 more years of life experience. It's something completely different. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any need for clarification? Thank you. The next presenter is Professor Alexia Thun-Kranz, Mathematical Economics at IIASA. And at the Institute of Statistics and Mathematical Methods in Economics at the Vienna University and Research Associate at IIASA. Good. Thank you.
So many thanks for the excellent pronunciation of my surname, which is really difficult, and many thanks, I think, to Sergey for inviting me to this conference, and it's a really great opportunity to also introduce you to what we are doing in the Vienna group about this aging. And I'm really grateful to my co-authors, Bernhard Hammer, Elke Leuchinger, Jože Samt, etc., who all contributed to what you will see in the next couple of minutes. So basically, my talk is about economic dependency measures. So how can we quantify economic dependency? And basically, let me just give you a motivation about the characteristic feature of the economic life course, which we would like to capture when we would say we want to measure economic dependency. So basically, I think it's almost kind of a physical law in every society. There are periods of economic dependency in young ages and in old ages. I'm purposefully not saying it's retirement, and I'm purposefully not saying it's education only in the young ages, because as we will see later on, it's quite changing over time. I mean, what we're really doing in these dependent life stages. Secondly, I think this is something we should not forget, that these differences in the economic life course, it's heavily shaped by the institutional frameworks, and it's really shaped by our own socio-economic characteristics. And I think this is kind of like this disturbance we often ignore when we try to say aging and longevity, but unfortunately I think there's a momentum effect that institutions are not changing as fast as they obviously should, and we're also, I think, ignoring much too often that there are quite increasing heterogeneity in terms of also like the longer we live. Secondly, let me also come to the economic dependency ratios, and why are we using this economic dependency ratio? And I think we measure them to understand economic dependency. That's perfectly fine. And we are also trying to use them to understand the consequences of population aging. However, I think we should not forget, I think that we are really using them because they should provide also some kind of legitimization of policies. So this is really, we should be careful when we use them, because they're often used immediately one-to-one for policy conclusions. And that's my really main conclusion. Be careful which dependency ratios you use for which question to be answered. That's really important. And finally, and this is basically what I just said, I think the results depend strongly on the exact definition of dependency. And this is where I would like just to introduce 3 of these dependency ratios in this talk. So the most common dependency ratio, in fact, will be the demographic dependency ratio, but let me put everything into a common framework. So what does a dependency ratio mean? Dependency ratio means that you will have in the numerator, you will have the dependent population, in a sense like depending on their characteristics, that's the X standing for it, and it depends here on the age, I. But in the denominator, you also have kind of those who are supporting the dependent people, again, and this will depend on the characteristics of these people. And now we can really think about how different dependency ratios fit into this common framework. And let me start with something we all know, it's the demographic dependency ratio, which is quite common. We're using it in a sense like to have the dependent population, we're giving it a 1 indicator. If people are in the age group less than 20 or greater than 59, that's often what we use, and 0 otherwise, and the support are those who are between 20 and 59. And as long as we say it's a demographic dependency ratio for the purpose of really understanding age structure changes, I think it's fine. but often we are using it for something very differently which we should not use it for. We are using it as an economic dependency ratio, and that's not what it is for. In fact, I'll introduce now two alternative measures who can really measure economic dependency. One of them is simply counting people who are indeed depending on others and counting people who are indeed supporting others. And then I give these, in the third measure, I give these people also the extent to which they depend and the extent to which they support. So let me move now to the second kind of employment-based dependency ratio. This is just giving now really only those who are depending are those who are non-employed. That's in an economic definition. And those who are supporting the others are the ones who are employed. And let me just convince you that it really makes a difference. So what I'm looking at here is now this employment dependency ratio. In the numerator, you have all those who are not employed. And these are not just the unemployed or the non-employed, but these are of course also the children, the domestic, those who are working at the household level, domestic level, and also other inactivities. Could be due to health reasons, other issues. And then the employed. And as you can imagine, there are no fixed age limits here. It's really like the definition of the dependency ratio being based on the characteristic, what you are contributing in a sense to an economy, but just counting numbers, not the extent yet. And as you see here, let me give you two examples. So all my examples are for Europe, I should say, because this was based on a European study. So Italy and Sweden, for example, both of them have quite high demographic dependency ratio. We know it. But as you see immediately, they have very different employment dependency ratios. And the reason is, like in Italy, we do know there's a much higher unemployment compared to Sweden. People exit the labor force much earlier as in Sweden, and the female labor force participation is much higher in Sweden as in Italy. So I think if you're an economist and want to tell something about economic dependency, I think the employment-based dependency ratio is the more adequate dependency ratio when you want to suggest really policies for the labor market. Now, just to convince you again here, that's a figure. I mean, it's clearly what you see here, it's the employment-based dependency ratio, and here you see the demographic dependency ratio. And the point I would like to make, I'm not going into detail in the countries, but basically what you should see, the same demographic dependency ratio has a huge variety across a different employment-based dependency ratio. So my message is very simple. Use the demographic dependency ratio to really characterize the age structure. Don't use it to give an economic policy kind of implications. Use different measures. And the employment-based dependency ratio is just one of many, but I think a very useful one if you just want to do labor market policy suggestions. Let me move to another kind of a third indicator I would like to introduce to you, and that's based on our national transfer account data. And I'm extremely happy that you already saw how the national transfer account might help us to get such indicators. So basically the national transfer account is a project which has been set up by Ron Lee and Andy Mason a couple of years, I think decades ago, and it's a unified approach to bring age into national accounts. So we have aggregate variables, but we try to disaggregate by age based on surveys, consumption, income, etc. So basically this national transfer account, they measure the production and generation of income. They measure the distribution of income, how in a sense we redistribute our resources in our economy across groups, especially from those who are depending on the others, I mean how they really can sustain their future. And then it's also the use of income, how we use it ourselves for consumption and savings. So as you see maybe now, by using this data, we can give not just who is employed, but we can really say to which extent, in a sense, does he really support the others, because we have now wage income. We're not just saying they are employed, we know how much they earn, how much taxes they have to pay. So we give an extent to the support ratio, but by also knowing how much you depend on others, by really knowing how much transfers you get in terms of health transfers, education transfers, elderly care transfers, we also give an extent to those who are, in a sense, dependent in a society. So that's the third step we move forward, in a sense, in this indicator now. maybe I skip this and immediately go to the kind of European case. So what you see here is really like the consumption, it's private and public consumption profile for several countries in Europe, and that's the labor income profile in several European countries. What we really are interested in a sense, like it's this redistribution, there are really a couple of age groups who earn more as they consume, and these are the age groups where you consume more as you earn. And as we have seen also in the talk by Ogawa, there's a redistribution of the surplus to these dependent populations. But now we really know in a sense like to which extent you're depending on others, because this is the difference between the consumption and the labor income. And we know also the extent to which you can support others. This is the difference between labor income and consumption. And basically we use these data now to have a third indicator, which we call kind of a life cycle deficit indicator, which measures the consumption of children and elderly that is not financed by their own labor income relative to the labor income produced in a society. And basically, again, just for two countries, Italy and Sweden, you see, for example, that they have very different aggregate life cycle deficits. That's how this dependency ratio is termed. I mean, it's much higher for Italy as compared to Sweden, but there's another information which is really nice here. We can have dynamic age cut-offs in a sense, like this is the cut-off age where the life cycle deficit becomes positive, where you are contributing more to the economy as you're drawing on the economy, and this is the cut-off ages when you're becoming dependent again. And these, as you see here, especially like these upper ages where you can become dependent again, they are not 60, they are not 65, they might be 58, they might be 67. So this is really kind of depending on the extent on which you're depending on a society on the others, or the extent to which you're contributing. So this is a really important message when we talk about really economic dependency, and when we want to really reform institutions, we have to move to such indicators. That's kind of the message I would like to convey here. And maybe I'll skip this figure. This is just plotting the employment-based dependency ratio against the aggregate life cycle. And again, we see they are not on a simple line, so we are adding more information by using another indicator. Now, how can this life cycle deficit be financed? So I'm moving beyond dependency ratios. I'm trying to really understand how can we really support these people. In fact, we have public transfers, like health, pension, education. We have private transfers, and unfortunately, in many of our statistics, we ignore these private transfers. And they are really important, as we have seen also, I think, also for Japan. And there are also asset-based reallocations. So asset-based reallocation is basically shifting capital around across ages through savings, property ownership, etc. And it's really kind of that all these flows might be mediated by public or private institutions. So let me really highlight these private transfers in the last 4 minutes maybe I have. Basically what we have done, and I should go to this figure, unfortunately the colors are lost a little bit, but let me focus first on the screen part here. So this is for all European countries, an average. What you see here, there are public transfers to the young children, to the old, to the elderly dependent population. There's a surplus generated. These are the taxes you are paying when you are working, and this is redistributed to the young and to the old. Then there's another thing which is called like the net asset-based allocation. That's the yellow part. So it's really like that you are trying to really finance part of your lifestyle also through asset accumulation. What you don't see in this figure that well are these blue areas, which I think from a really policy point, they're extremely important and they're often forgotten. It's the net time transfers, which unfortunately you don't see at all at the moment here. And it's the net private transfers, which is really net private transfers means like if parents give some really monetary values to their children. So here it's in the negative part, so they give something to the children. That's basically what you see. And again, you really don't see, unfortunately, you don't see these net time transfers, but these are the, in a sense, like really time you spend for others. And watch this figure, you see much better now. And it's my last figure I would like to show you. What you see here are net time transfers for Sweden and Italy. So that's kind of the benchmark cases in Europe we have. And you see it for women and you see it for males and females. So the blue one is the kind of like, for the average European man, how much time transfers does he will in a sense reallocate during his life course. So in fact he obtains a lot when he is young, he almost gives nothing when he is at working age, and he obtains a lot again when he is old. The females are just the other way around. Of course, when you're young, as a female you obtain time transfers from your parents, but you give a lot to all the others, almost during your whole active lifespan. Even when you're old, you're giving a lot. So that's the average European. What about Italy? For Italy, it's even more, it's the dashed line for females. They give a lot to all the others. And the other dashed line here is for Sweden. And now for the males, you see like, it's an Italian men, they're never giving any money to anyone else on average. I mean, this is really kind of like the benchmark case. You see here, while, I mean, the female, the males in Sweden, they give quite a lot of also time transfers to others. My point here is like, I should end up now, my point is really like, if we have to reform our welfare state, it's not a free lunch by saying people should work longer, people should contribute more to the workforce, because in fact they're already contributing a lot of their time to kind of unvalued work, which we will miss, of course, when we try to get them also more into employment. I'm not saying we should not try to get them into employment. My point is more, we should think in societies how to value these time transfers, which are so important in the future, I think, but they're so diverse across societies and depending on institutional arrangements. Let me end up, I think the conclusion, economic dependency is determined by the demography, of course, but it's mainly driven by age-specific type and intensity of economic activity, and it's the definition of dependency which is so important when we give policy conclusions. We should use the correct dependency measures. What are effective ways to decrease economic dependency? And this is only a selection from my own studies. It's the use of labor force potential, I think, at all ages, not just at old ages, it's also the unemployed, I think we have to get more into the labor force, but it's something which is really important, it's investment in human capital. We have shown in another study, education-specific transfers, they look very differently as the aggregate over all education groups. And let me really stress the investment in human capital, it's a source of the future benefits. They are paying higher taxes, they are more healthy, they are less drawing maybe on transfers when they are old, etc. So human capital, it's something we won't see tomorrow, we will see in 20 years, but it helps us a lot to get really many of these kind of challenges taken care of. And finally, I think it's also a provision, I mean, that we should try to also have little bit more focus also on asset reallocations in the future, and how dependency rates are defined plays a crucial role in how we measure and think about dependency in terms of policy. And just advertisement, we have an agenda database, you can download our data on the national transfer accounts for Europe, and many thanks to all my colleagues who have worked with me during the last years, and we have 2 finance proposals. This is already finished, it was an EU project, and this is again a EU project where we are bringing well-being into the national transfer accounts, which we are working on as well. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Any question of, any need of clarification? Yes.
The units on the y-axis, was that hours per day, or what was it?
So basically these were the net hours per day, yes, so that's true. And it's net time transfer because it's the difference between what you obtain and what you give to others.
Any questions?
Hello, my name is Linda Amori from the UFPA. Good questions on the economy of the care, actually. So you mentioned that there might be some of the transfer between generations. In this region particularly, I think it's very important to address the sort of the care for the elderly and care for the children. This all actually not prominent in the economy. So is that really included in that analysis or not? If not, that might be a question to all of the panel members. That's probably, I mean, I've been struggling because I'm an economist, I'm a legal doctor by background, but when you think about the whole of the economy, the whole population aging, I think it's really need to be addressed. And also, how we address it is probably gender inequality is another issue.
Yes, I think it's a good one because we talk about labor participation, but the fact is women contribute to a large part of the unpaid care domestic work, and which remain invisible and is not part of the productive activities in the system of national income. So how do you, or is there any need to account for this part of the women participation in your model?
For a figure which is no longer here, but so what we are doing, in fact, we are giving it a value. So you are totally right, it's not in the usual national transfer account, but what we are using is time use surveys, which are, in Europe we have 2 of them which are really can be used, and we are giving a value to this time, and we are giving a value in the terms of the average wage in the economy. There are different valuations. You can give it the value of your own wage. It's an opportunity cost approach that you are saying, like a female in a specific age having a specific education, what's her opportunity cost by staying at home and not be on the labor market. This would be the opportunity cost valuation, but we are giving it a different kind of valuation. We are giving it a valuation of the average wage earned by a female in this age group. And basically then we can combine the market-based activities and the non-market-based activities by giving it a valuation. And in fact what we then observe, and maybe this is, I can use maybe this figure, no I can't speak anymore, but there's in fact, maybe, yeah, now I can, sorry. I think this is the figure for Slovenia, Italy and Austria, which I can use to show you. And here it's basically the used hours, but we can also give it a valuation. Sorry, this takes some time, but here, there, here. So what you see here, it's really kind of what we have done in another paper. It's called the rush hour of life. We took Austria, Italy, and Slovenia, and this is now minutes. What you see here, and basically this is always the women, and these are the men. And we have distributed housework, childcare, and paid work. And what you see, and I think this is really interesting for Europe, is Slovenia. It's this double burden. What we see in Slovenia, there the females have a really high labor force participation in terms of European standards. But at the same time they're working a lot at home. And so basically females are even contributing more in terms of really now the hours, the minutes, contributed to the economy. And we can give it a valuation by, as I just told you, multiplying with the market wage. But the point I think we want to make is really that our societies need to incorporate this when they talk about kind of production possibilities, to have this kind of non-market also work, really having it a value. And on the other hand, when we do policy conclusions or policy suggestions, we should not ignore it, because if we are in a sense like giving up the support of the family to many of our people, then we are missing a lot in our society and we have to substitute it. And I think this is a discussion which is really important in terms of welfare reforms.
Thank you. Professor, do you have a point, a comment on it?
No, I wanted to stress what Alexis said on the possibility of thinking about potentially foregone care work that is not provided by the market in terms of opportunity costs. So we do have relatively straightforward way of valuing and bringing numbers to the picture when it comes to confronting policymakers with options that would imply that certain type of care war is not given anymore. It's just the pure economic view of it, but you know, in terms of we use such type of measurements and such type of comparisons often in AMAs for us to be able to at least bring some kind of quantitative part to it.
So there seem to be two separate issues here. One is the measurement one. So is the care included in GDP? And the answer is by and large no or well. The second one is, well, if we're trying to raise GDP to bring about more resources to help finance an aging society, how do we get that conflict between caring and GDP sorted out? Because if you just put more people into work, there's less people to care. And there, I think, there's sort of two approaches. One is we have to think about how we work, and we're going to have to make flexible working more easily done and something the government supports and pushes on both men and efficient. And I do think that there's a very important interplay between ageing and technology. Both in the workplace, I think technology will support older workers more, and then I think the really big gains from this new technology are going to be unleashing productivity gains in the home and the household, probably more than in the workplace. So there's a lot to be done there as well.
We have the data on the time budget study, it's bad too, but the problem is that, the Japanese, the wives tend to care to their mother-in-law, and also their own mother, and then data says, I spend these many hours for care, but we don't know exactly for who, and those who are living together or those who are not living together. So that could be a problematic implication of Japanese data, but we have some data, the estimation done, making some assumptions.
Thank you very much. Yes, good.
Oh, thank you very much. Ken Wisdom from Age International, and I just want to support what has been said already in terms of the importance of the work of the National Transfer Accounts. We commissioned research from the Overseas Development Institute using Jacques Chang's database on time use surveys to actually understand how do these issues play out in lower and middle income countries, particularly with respect to the contributions that older women are making. And it reinforces very much what you've been saying. I think that there's particular policy consequences to not taking into account the economic contributions that are being made, both in terms of the informal sector, but the unpaid work that older women are doing. And the research uncovered is that actually older women, by not valuing, by not taking into account these economic contributions, their own well-being is being damaged. They are contributing to their societies, their families, their communities, and yet their own lives are being made worse off as a result because they are not being given the support they need and require. So these have very real-life consequences. And I did want to ask, though, the question, because in where the majority of the world's older people actually live, it's not, where we've been talking about, aside from the national transfer accounts, the time use calculations about economic contributions as within the formal sector, informal employment, but yet the reality for most of the work that older women and men are doing is within the informal sector. And yet, so my question is it possible, are there calculations, are we taking into account the informal economic sector in your work, and how can we do that?
Well, so thank you for a great panel. I just wanted to relate what you presented to another discussion that is going on, organized by ILO, on the future of work. Now, so if you think on a world with a restricted number of jobs, with the problem in terms of job creation, with the process of flexibilization, automation, and robotization, and within some context, even the discussion of the reduction of work days or working hours, and then you link to what you talked here in terms of aging with more years of working life or the possibility of working longer. So to what extent that may be, at a certain point, even sound paradoxical. And I know that in one of the presentations there was this mention to this idea of younger versus older, or avoiding this idea of younger versus older. But in fact, in many of the countries, for example, you have increasing unemployment youth rates. No? Massimo Lividacci, which is an Italian demographer, mentioned in a conference he gave in Mexico some time ago, a very large potential intergenerational conflict in there, especially in certain high-skilled jobs where there's also a very few number of new jobs created, and still you have younger generations. So I don't know if you would address a little bit of that.
The next question.
Yeah. Thanks for this great panel. I have just one short specific question to Alexia. This concerning the private transfers within the families, and if I recall it properly, it was this light blue. Maybe I have overlooked something, but I saw only private transfers from the adult working age population to their children, but none at all from the retirees, the older generation, grandparent generation, to their adult children and their grandchildren. Have I overlooked something, or is there so little a transfer which would be very puzzling to me?
Thank you very much. We will come back for a second one, right after the analyst. Okay, Alexia.
So I'll start with the last question by Pauline. And in fact, I mean, what I've shown you is the average over all European countries. And if you look by single European countries, you find much more. And in fact, the blue didn't really appear correctly. So there is some transfer in terms of really kind of monetary values, but also of these savings. I mean, they're also having savings which they then give to the young or to their adult children. So there is some. And the other sector about this informal sector, how it is taken account of. I mean, we don't know whether they obtain the income from the informal sector, of course. We don't have data here. But what we do know if there are private transfers, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of money. And there are private transfers in terms of money. From which sector they come, we don't of course know, we only know the transfer stream. And then maybe just one comment to the other question about the competition. I mean that for the young people to find a job because unemployment is high. Again, let me really focus. I think that this is the reason why we need to invest even more in human capital, because of course also unemployment, there is some unemployment among educated, but it's much, much lower as among the low educated. And not only the unemployment is lower among the educated, it's the educated people who are easier to adapt to new kind of technologies. When we talk about digitalization and the new kind of economy, I think education is one of the single most important factors to invest in the future, to also draw the advantage out of these new technologies. And I think this would be my answer, because there is of course complementarity among, I think, these technologies and highly skilled, while there is really substitution among low skilled and these new technologies.
If I could just also pick up on the future of work point. It's a huge topic, of course, and there's two parts to it. Will we be able to take away jobs from the young? And two, will technology mean there's any jobs left? On the first one, will we be able to take away jobs from the young? I like to think of it as the Prince Philip effect. In my own country, Prince Philip is 71 and still not yet the king. He's waiting to get the job, and you're going to see this more and more with people aging and still working. However, I think it's a mistake to think about that in the aggregate. You will not see old people take away jobs from the young. It just doesn't happen. Let me give you an example. In the 20th century, most countries, certainly OECD countries, have had an enormous increase in the number of women at work. And that hasn't come at a massive decrease in the number of men at work. In fact, the number of men working is larger than it's ever been. So we just create more jobs, and if older people work for more and get paid more, they demand more, they create jobs. You gave the example of countries with high youth unemployment. They've got a problem, they're not very good at creating jobs. And that's not about the number of old people, they just don't have job creation. And both for technology and longevity, you really have to put a focus on job creation. Now in terms of the second point, will technology take away jobs? We don't know. We've never seen a technology that's created mass unemployment. But some people argue this time we will, this time it's different. And it could be. But I think in general what you're going to see, both from longevity, longer lives, and technology, is a big change in what our careers look like. So for instance, if we're going to be working until 70s or 80s, we have a 50, 60-year career, and we have to do that very differently from what we do now. I think the US government thinks you're going to have like 15 jobs and 4 or 5 different careers. And I think technology will add to that disruption. So we need to think about employment and careers in a very different way. And whilst I, of course, as a professor, I'm not going to disagree with the importance of education, I think it's a very different type of education. Both how we teach, when we teach, what we teach, and who we teach will be very, very different. And it's going to have to be education, certainly in adult years, very focused around employment rather than qualifications. So I think, to me, the big change in technology and longevity is less in unemployment, but what our jobs are and what our careers look like and how we support them.
I can add a bit to that. On the future of work, if you have a look at economists, we tend to be very technology optimists, and I'm not going to be heretic in that. So I'm much more optimistic than the average individual when it comes to how the future will look like in terms of the interaction of jobs, aging, and technology. We have seen quite a lot of change already in the technological content and the skills composition of jobs over the last 200 years, right? So starting with the Industrial Revolution, and then having a look at the effects that globalization have had on the skill composition of jobs, say in Europe, with this hollowing out of middle skills and polarization of the type of jobs. And people don't tend to see that as an apocalyptic type of disruptive trend, something that we have been dealing with in a market economy type way, on average. Which doesn't mean that has not come hand in hand with a lot of changes also in terms of the type of skills that need to be offered in the market. And I think that it's again education that will play a role. And I think it will have to do, like you said, Andrew, it will have to do with what you get taught and how you get it taught, in terms of having this malleability of skills that will allow you to play around in a setting in which you're not born to be in the same sector forever, and you need to jump around, right?
There's a few responses. I was talking about the untapped resources of elderly persons to come up with this to boost the economy. And one assumption is that I calculated the income gain without changing consumption. When the income increases, consumption responds. So actually take another step to calculate the net effect, but I didn't do that. So the value, figures I showed today is a bit overestimated in that sense to calculate the export ratio. And the other point is that substitution about the elderly and the young unemployment problem. I calculated that. If we hire these people, are they going to affect the young people? And based on the wage census data, I calculated the impact is fairly small, and which is same result as Axel's plan calculated for the entire Europe. So I think that unemployment among young people is sort of one of the problems that people worry about it. They hire more elderly persons in the labor market, but in my exercise, the impact is fairly limited. So, but I would say that Japan, as you know, that starting from April this year, the Japanese government is open the door for the foreign workers. Next 5 years we're going to have 350,000 workers. But before that, I think government should have calculated something like that, untapped the resources that we already have. Unfortunately, I think the government didn't do that exercise that much, and we just jump onto this the immigration policies. Thank you.
If you don't mind, you take the last 3 questions, and then okay.
Okay, quick question to Jesus. What is the reason for the causal reasons behind your findings? Do you have some ideas? Because I'm a little puzzled by the fact that you said when you explicitly include life expectancy, it still holds, because the only difference between the conventional knowledge dependency ratio and the adjusted is that life expectancy is taken into account. Then a quick question to here. I mean, much of what you showed for Japan is really on sort of a cross-section, and it's caused by the fact that the younger cohorts are wealthier than the previous ones. Have you ever tried to do this by cohorts?
Any other questions? I can answer my question quickly anyway. Usually what most models of this type include is overall life expectancy, right? And the prospective measures have a look at remaining life expectancy at a given age, right? And the dynamics that you get are completely different from what you get, and completely different from what you could, or the variation that you could obtain by just having a look at overall life expectancy and chronological age measures. So it's the way in which remaining life expectancy and overall chronological age structures interact with each other that obviously contains predictive information in terms of income dynamics.
It's a reflection. With prospective aging measures, if we're just going to stay at the descriptive level, will this somehow institutionalize the elongation of this rush hour and maintain the gender difference? Because it's an invisible solution.
Last question, Professor Hussein.
Thank you, it's Sandrine Hussein. Just a couple of questions, one for Andrew and one for Alexia. Andrew, you talked about the longevity opportunity. And I'm just thinking, and you also mentioned this different career path, having more careers, doing flexible work. And just if you can give us a bit of reflection on the impact of that on the wider economy, particularly grey economy. So not as much as the impact on the younger people or the younger generation, but the structure of the economy. And Alexia talked about wealth transfer and the striking gender differences and also the kind of in-kind care. And if you can elaborate on this a little bit more, particularly in terms of savings from older people to younger generation, and with a gender lens, that would be great. Thank you.
So on the rush hour one, and I pick up on that point, my key insight to all of this is we have to reshape time. And we've got a great opportunity to unbundle those pinch points in life. There's growing evidence that there's a sort of a U-shape to lifetime happiness. We've got an opportunity to rearrange things, to take away the burden. And that is what I think we will start to do. We will start to choose to have children at different times. We will plan our work differently. And we have to make sure governments and employers support that so we can get rid of that. And just very quickly on the longevity effect, it is at every age. At every age, people have got more time than before. So governments are going to support people investing to be healthy and productive for longer, and take away the barriers from being productive for longer. So in particular for older workers, it's making sure the tax and benefit system doesn't stop those who are healthy and productive from working for longer, while supporting those who aren't healthy and productive, just through ensuring that they've got support. And making sure we've got an education system that also helps people in their 50s and 60s, both in terms of corporate education and university education, or college education, to keep people productive and keep going.
I think I have a quick answer, and I say, no, I can't say gender difference in savings, because savings is really at the household level at the moment, and it's the household head, and it's definitely in most of the elderly ages. It's a cross-sectional pattern you see here. So these are really cohorts now in the elderly ages, which have grown up in a time where it's mainly the household income attributed to the males. So no, unfortunately so far not, but we're working on this by having gender-specific LTA also.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panelists and thank you for the 6 additional minutes. We can continue the discussion during the lunch. Thank